Well, thank you for joining us. My name is Damon Reabe. I'm the president of two aerial application companies located in Wisconsin, Reabe Spraying Service and Dairyland Aviation. We've been performing aerial seeding of cover crop extensively since 2011, and this presentation has been developed based on successes and failures associated with those applications. This is a presentation that I gave at the 2018 National No-Till Conference, and it's being brought to you in a possibly more convenient way. So let's get started. I think everybody's probably at their desks. They've got notepads out, pens in their hands, and I think you're going to be excited about the title of this slide. All this work that we've done beginning in 2011 has made it possible for us here in the northern Midwest to figure out how to establish hip-high cover crops planted in the late fall by air. There's a secret. You need to find a really short guy. This here is a picture of my son Max. It was taken in 2013, about 6 years ago. At that time, Max was about 3 going on 4 years old. Since then, he's gotten taller, and we haven't had a hip-high cover crop with Max in the field yet. So I like to start out with a little joke so you guys understand that we have to set proper expectations of what it is that we're doing. The topics of the presentation, we're going to start off, and I think anybody that sees this done wonders how it happens, and we would like to talk about the equipment used to spread the seed, how we test for uniformity, 5 steps we've created for successful fall interseeding, how predators affect cover crop stands, and other considerations for successful establishment. A really important point in this presentation is to understand that I'm from Wisconsin. So a lot of what we're doing here may or may not apply where you're at, but I believe these concepts can be taken to other parts of the country to ensure success. First, we're going to talk about the equipment itself. This is a picture taken from the front of the aircraft facing backwards of the spreader. The spreader is the stainless steel portion of this aircraft. And what we do is we remove all of the liquid equipment from the aircraft and install this spreader. The part that I'm highlighting right now with the mouse is the gate. This gate opens in a metered fashion or a measured fashion from inside the cockpit of the aircraft. The material falls out the trailing edge of this gate and enters this venturi. This is a very large venturi that's taking air, accelerating it into this area, and then the spreader is constructed so that that material gets divided amongst these vanes to be spread behind the aircraft. This is a picture of the spreader removed from the aircraft. This is to show the rivet line of these vanes. So the material that falls out of the gate up in this area right here at the bottom of the hopper gets divided amongst these vanes. Material on this side, material along this side will follow along in this vane. And as you can see these various rivet lines, that is how the material gets spread behind the airplane. Here's a picture showing the aircraft actually performing an aerial seeding application, and you might be saying to yourself, how on earth is this cloud of seed landing in the right spot? Well, there's a little bit more to it, right? We actually do extensive pattern testing to confirm that we have a uniform swath. So we load the aircraft with the seed that we're going to be spreading, the actual seed species that we intend on spreading. We put out collector units that are approximately a 4-foot diameter collector unit on 6-foot spacing on a 150-foot wide flight line. We fly over, releasing the product. These collectors funnel the material into vials that are located here. We then measure each of those vials with a gram scale and enter those results into software specifically built to determine our pattern uniformity. That software will generate an average pattern like this, and you can see over here on the far left side of the pattern, there's no material, and the material's ramping up. We have a fairly uniform deposition across the center of the pattern, and then a tapering off along the other edge. The software then determines what our most effective uniform swath width is by using the software to add the material from this side to the material from this side to get an equivalent amount of material in between the center of the center of the aircraft on each swath. I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So this is a picture of spring barley that was seeded into sweet corn, and you can see the extremely uniform spread pattern of the aircraft. This is what a cover crop application should look like when it's done properly. So now we're going to move on to selecting seed species. What's going to work in your area? I'm a huge proponent of the book cover that you see here. It's called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. If you were to Google that book title, it would take you to a link where you could download this book onto your computer for free. This book is based on my own research, the most comprehensive accumulation of cover crop information that I've been able to find in a singular resource. And we're going to go through parts of this book and how you might use it. For starters, you have to figure out what seeds work when broadcast. And I use a real simple way of looking at this. Within this book, these particular pictures were photos taken out of that Managing Cover Crops Profitably book. And what I'm looking for to determine if a species will work is I'm looking at the planting depth. If the minimum planting depth required is greater than 3/4 of an inch, that's a seed species that will not work when broadcast. So if we move over here to cowpeas, we see that the minimum planting depth for cowpeas as a cover crop is 1 inch. That seed is a large seeded legume that needs complete soil coverage in order to grow and is not a good candidate for broadcasting. Here's another seed species, field peas, minimum planting depth of 1.5 inches. You can see looking through the rest of these various seed species that you have many options. Your grass species do very, very well broadcast. Your brassicas do very, very well. And your small to medium-sized legumes do very, very well when broadcast. Now, you've got a lot of choices at this point. Let's start narrowing things down. Again, this is out of that Managing Cover Crops Profitably book. We've got the seed species here. It's going to talk to you about the hardiness zone in a number format. We're going to get to a map. So when you're looking at a seed species, when you look at this number, if you're not located in that number, that may not be the most ideal seed species for your area. I then look at how tolerant is the seed to drought. It's entirely possible that your seed, your cover crop, is going to be exposed to drought conditions or drought-like conditions. So the more drought tolerant the seed species is, the better off you are. Next, I want to look at how tolerant it is to shade, because if you're going to be using an aircraft to do aerial seeding, you're most likely going to be interseeding it into an existing crop, and it's going to be dealing with a lot of shade. The greater that the black area is filled in here, the more shade tolerant that species is. Here's a picture of the winter hardiness zone. So for instance, I'm located right about here in Wisconsin in the blue area. We come down to the blue area and we're in a winter hardiness zone number 5. So when we're looking at this winter zone hardiness, annual ryegrass would be winter hardy as a winter annual in a very reliable way in a winter hardiness zone 6. spring barley would actually, winter barley would actually survive the winter in a zone 7. Oats would survive in a winter hardiness zone 8. Look at here. Cereal rye is good in a winter hardiness zone 3, which actually, here's 5, here's 4, here's 3. So in the area that I'm working in, I'm actually seeding in 3 different winter hardiness zones. And you can see how I may select more winter hardy seeds based on where it is that I'm performing the application. Okay, now you've figured out what seeds are options, what seeds are appropriate in your area. Now you're going to need to pick a rate. Now, in this particular book, they talk about broadcast rates and drilled rates. Other than the annual ryegrass species, what I have found is that a successful stand at a drilled rate is more than adequate. These rates over here, you'll find get to be actually too heavy and go beyond a cover crop and are turning almost into a crop-like mat when successful. Next thing you need to do is confirm that you're going to have seed to soil contact. And so this picture is a real interesting photo. This was a mix of annual ryegrass, radish, and crimson clover applied onto soybeans. And you can see, looking at this picture, in this area, we had an exceptional cover crop stand, but if this area was also seeded, and you'll notice that we have very little stand off to the right of the photo. The entire field was flown, and so when we saw this stripe, we were very confused, and we spoke to the grower, and here's what we learned. The grower said, if you remember, the year before, there was a tree line located here. We removed this tree and fence line. We actually did some tillage to manage the debris. They're a no-till farmer, but they basically had to do some tillage in this fence line to prep it for planting. And over here, the previous year was corn. Once we understood that, we looked closer in this area and we noticed that the seed was actually laying on top of the previous year's corn residue. That seed actually never made it to the surface of the soil. Annual ryegrass is a very small seed, does not have a lot of starch in it for it to live off of after germination. So it was unable for that cotyledon and initial root to ever make contact with the soil, and that germinated and died on the soil surface. Whereas in this area where there was good seed to soil contact, those seeds germinated and grew. This is extremely important to remember moving forward, that we scout our fields to ensure that there's going to be some degree of seed to soil contact. Okay, this is probably the most important thing that we're going to do throughout our decision-making process. We need to apply the seed at the correct time. The cover crop is going to need access to sunlight after it germinates. There's a general rule of thumb that you can apply to any cropping system. The cover crop seed will need sunlight, access to sunlight, 2 weeks after germination. And I've got some slides coming up to kind of illustrate what happens if it doesn't get access to sunlight. This is a bit of a busy slide, but what we did, we flew on 2 bushels of spring barley on September 6th. It was a 2013 event. This all went into silage corn. I want to describe the silage corn crop. It's literally 14-foot tall silage corn on 20-inch rows. This is a very, very dense canopy, extremely productive silage corn. Again, note, it was flown on September 6th. And if you notice, we've got a photo taken here on this side on September 25th. This is 19 days after seeding, right? So we said we want to have this crop have access to sunlight within 2 weeks. And of course, the silage corn is still standing. If you look closely here, you see very tall spring barley plants. what they're actually doing is they are attempting to compete for sunlight with the silage. On September 27th, the grower called and said, we were off on our scheduled harvest date of the silage. We're wondering if the cover crop is going to survive if we were to harvest it tomorrow, which happened to be a Saturday, or could they wait until Monday to do the harvest? So I agreed to go back out and look at the field. So on the 27th of September, this photo was taken in the same spot as this photo was. And when you look at this picture, you can see that all of this barley is laying flat and it's in the process of dying. And it's happening in a 48-hour period. It has been starved of sunlight and it is not competing with that silage corn. Not competing for sunlight with that silage corn. Here's a photo taken on that same day where they did the harvest date as projected. They took a small harvest area out of this field, and that's when they realized the silage was too moist for harvesting. But you can see these plants are much shorter, they have much deeper roots, and they are much healthier. That's because these plants got access to sunlight on the 18th of September. Here's a photo of the two different harvest dates. On the left side of the photo, you can see the cover crop stand of spring barley where the harvest happened on the 18th of September. And you can see the extreme difference in the cover crop stand where the harvest happened 10 days later. This is still an excellent cover crop stand, but we were only a matter of a few days from losing a much greater percentage of the population of the cover crop due to the starvation of the plants of sunlight. So let's review what we've done so far. We've picked a competent applicator. We picked the correct seed. We've selected the appropriate rate, and we put the seed on at the correct time. So what in the world happened? So this photo is interesting. Right here, we've got a county conservationist. He's got his hands on his hips. We've got a gentleman here from the NRCS. He's got his hands on his hips. We've got the farmer. He's looking at me like I'm from another planet. And often in this area, this is just a grassy area that is not cropped. Over in here is where the cover crop is supposed to be. And this is a picture of myself. I'm phoning a friend. Obviously, something happened and nobody understands why nothing's growing. Well, we're going to talk about the first complication you have. If you look at this photo here on the left side of the screen, you can see a cover crop stand that looks very uniform. And this was in silage corn where it was harvested. When the grower made this last pass, their bunkers were full. The remainder of this crop was saved for grain corn or high moisture corn. Now, I'd like to be able to tell you that I was able to place these seeds exactly down this row and that I didn't put any seeds over here. But the fact of the matter is this entire field was seeded. And this photo here was taken in this photo prior to this harvest. So we had cover crop established in between the rows, growing quite well with corn that's drying down. What happened was this cover crop was not dormant. It was still growing. The harvest took place. The residue was finally chopped and laid on top of the cover crop, and it starved that cover crop from sunlight. We did not, that time of the year in Wisconsin, in November, we don't have enough heat units or day length for that cover crop to grow back through this residue and survive. So it was actually the harvesting of the corn that killed this particular cover crop. Here's another photo that shows the impacts of residue and the timing of the harvest. So we flew on 30 pounds of cereal rye on the 10th of September in 2014 across this entire field, all the way across the field. But notice the difference in stand uniformity. The grower harvested this field on October 6th of 2014. He left 3 different strips in the field for insurance purposes. You can see one strip here, another strip here, and outside the photo there's a strip outside the viewing of this particular photo. And those insurance strips were harvested 1 month later. Notice the difference in the stand in this area versus this area. This is a dramatic difference in stand, and it has to do with the fact that the residue was put on top of this cover crop at a time when there was not enough day length or heat units for that cover crop to grow back through the residue. Whereas a month earlier, we have more heat units and more day length, and it allows that cover crop to get through the residue and get access to sunlight and continue to grow. One note I'd like to make, you see this strip and this strip, this particular grower is using controlled traffic. These are tram lines where there wasn't any crop, there was access to sunlight and very little residue, and of course we have a very good stand. I'd also like to point out this was only 30 pounds of cereal rye. These photos were taken the following spring. All right, you're gonna just not even believe what I'm about to tell you next. Earthworms are the ultimate no-till drill. This photo is a cross-section of soil. This is the soil surface, and then this is moving down. You can see what would be the entrance of a earthworm burrow, I'll call it. This is the actual channel of the earthworm burrow, and look at what happened. The seed got placed here. How did it get from the soil surface, which, I certainly did not place it there with my airplane, right? I obviously would have placed it somewhere on top of the soil surface. The earthworm actually grabbed that seed and brought it approximately 4 inches below the surface of the soil. That seed, of course, germinated, and I've got some more pictures to kind of prove that I'm not a lunatic. Here's an earthworm burrow. Here's a seed, here's a seed, here's a seed, here's a seed. The earthworms are, I did not put these seeds all inside this 3-inch circle. These seeds would have been spread evenly throughout this entire picture. And another photo. Notice how there are 1, 2, 3, 4 plants all grouped at this earthworm burrow and not a single plant anywhere else. I certainly did not place all 4 of those seeds in that location. These would have, again, been broadcast evenly throughout this photo, but something brought those seeds to this location. And of course, it was the earthworm, because this is an actual earthworm mitten, if you will. Here's another photo. This is a springtime photo after termination. Notice a clump of plants here, a clump of plants here, a clump of plants here, a clump of plants here. Obviously, at the time of application, there was even distribution of all of these seeds. So these earthworms are actually gathering up these seeds and bringing them into their burrows. And what I've experienced in many, many cases is that we have what we would consider a stand failure in the fall. We can't find any evidence of a cover crop establishment in the fall, and what's actually taken place in real healthy soils with high earthworm activity is the earthworms are bringing this, we use a lot of cereal rye, they're bringing that cereal rye down to a very, very deep planting depth, like that first photo that I showed you. The seed is germinating, the plant is growing, the ground freezes, that plant is actually going dormant throughout the winter, and in the spring, it finally emerges. I'll talk to growers who are very disappointed in their cover crop stand in the fall, only to be very happy with their cover crop stand in the spring. ideally, you wouldn't have this happening at all, but this is a problem that you need to be aware of, and I'm not aware of a method that would change that. I'm just happy that a grower has that high of an earthworm population in their field. Frankly, this particular cover crop was doing the farmer a lot of good. Your erosion issues are certainly a big concern, obviously in the springtime, and we do have a living plant in the soil leading up to the ground freezing and the soil becoming more dormant. Here's our next issue, slugs. It's a pretty lengthy story. I'm not going to go into how we discovered it, but what I can tell you is we've had a horrendous amount of problems with slugs. This particular photo on the left of the screen is a photo of a cereal rye seed, and on the germ end of the seed, you can see that it has been chewed on by something. This actually happened prior to germination. This is a photo of me catching the little critter in the act. This is a cereal rye seed. This is the mouth part of the slug, and it is actually eating the germ end of that cereal rye seed. Slugs are devastating. I'm gonna give you a minute. I'd like you to see if you can find all of the slugs in this picture. So spend a little time looking for some slugs. While you're looking for some slugs, I want to show you, here's a cereal rye seed. That's the germ end that's been eaten. The seed rotted from the inside out. This is a killed, the seed is dead. Here's a cereal rye seed, same thing. Here's another cereal rye seed, same thing. Here's another cereal rye seed, same thing. Now let's see if you can find all of the slugs. There's one. There's one. That one isn't too hard to find. There's another one. There's another one. And the last one. Now, you can see we're all familiar with the size of a cereal rye seed, but we're looking at, I would say, maybe at the most, 2/3 of a square foot. And we have 6 slugs that have come to the surface and have destroyed the entire cover crop seed, all of the cover crop seeds, and we have a complete stand failure. So what do we do about it? And part of the reason why this is here, this is an NRCS document, and this particular document is, I'm going to kind of blow up some of these. It's talking about the damage that they do, and it's basically stating that, you know, this actually has happened, and the University of Wisconsin, along with the NRCS, has observed this. It says slugs have a rasp-like mouth part called a radula and damage seeds by hollowing out the germ growing tissue and by scraping off leaf tissue on both seedlings and mature plants. What I found is if the plant can get to be a couple inches tall, they won't wipe it out. The problem we found is that in as little as 48 hours, with the presence of slugs, they can actually destroy any amount of seed that you have broadcast if they're present. So what do? We need to scout for these slugs. I'm not going to read all the scouting suggestions. It's a simple process. Basically, you go out to the more moist areas of your field. You lay some kind of either cardboard or a piece of wood, something to create 24-hour shade. Mark where that is. Do this in several places within the field. Come back 24 to 48 hours. Lift up the board, and if there is I can't say how many slugs, but if you are able to find slugs, you are likely faced with a serious problem, and you may need to consider or should consider drilling your cover crop rather than broadcasting it. Talk here about other options if you have slugs. We have noticed that slugs seem to leave brassicas alone. They seem to leave all the legume species alone. They seem to leave annual ryegrass alone. So if you're in an area where you have enough growing season to establish these seed species, these are seed species that are far less affected by the presence of slugs than, say, for instance, spring barley, wheat, cereal rye, etc. If you're a long ways north and you have a lot of slugs, look at possibly drilling, or a method that we've tried here in Wisconsin, which is frost seed. This is a photo of 2 bushels of cereal rye that was flown onto soybean stubble in March 22nd of 2017. This photo was taken approximately 1 month later. This particular field would be is an excellent candidate for it's been no-till for a lengthy period of time. There's a heavy slug population, and so had we put these 2 bushel out in this field in the fall, it's been my experience the whole field would look like this untreated area that we did trials here. There's a treated area, untreated, treated, untreated, and then you can't see, but we had a third treated area trying to replicate the success of the spring seeding. Had we done this in the fall, I can feel pretty confident with the presence of slugs. This is what the whole field would look like. So, are we as happy with the growth that we have in late April compared to fall seeding of cereal rye? No. This, of course, we'd like to see this taller, but given our weather conditions, when things freeze up, the inability to have time to get a drill behind harvest out into this field, this is an alternative that is working very well. We're actually in our 3rd year of trials on this, and I think we have a really nice cover crop stand that's doing a lot for the soil and a lot to prevent runoff and a lot of good for this farmer. Here's a picture of that same field. This photo was taken yet 1 month later. This was going to be there was sweet corn actually planted into this field, so this was allowed to grow. And you can see we've got an extremely uniform stand, and we have extremely good growth. Another advantage I see in spring seeding of a winter annual is that if this particular seed does not vernalize, it will remain vegetative. So the concern about the plant going into a reproductive growth stage and tying up a lot of nitrogen in the carbon is less of a worry and makes the termination of this cover crop more manageable, allowing you a larger window to come in and kill this rye, and leaving you the option of planting green into this cover crop for a longer period of time. Here's a photo. This was a same planting date. This was into corn residue where soybeans were planted. So we had a cover crop all the way across this field, and the grower killed everything but what was in this singular strip and planted the soybeans. You can see a soybean stand over here. There's actually soybeans in here, and allowed that cover crop to grow. This photo was taken on the 8th of June. The grower saw no yield drag whatsoever. He couldn't say if he saw a yield enhancement, but at harvest time, there was no difference in the appearance or yield of the soybeans in this location versus this location. What this grower did, they did all of their normal pre-emerge herbicide applications while the cover crop, after it had been established and was growing. They did their broadleaf application and then simply held off their last pass of Roundup until around, this had actually already been sprayed. It had been sprayed on about the 6th of June, and killing off this when they would make their normal Roundup application. This is doing a lot of good for the soil compared to what's happening over here. And so again, just a different technique that we've looked at for the last couple of years and have been very pleased with. Another concern that we've run into is that I hear it a lot from growers. This is only going to work if there's a lot of rain. That's a common statement I hear from my customers. So here I'd like to show you, this was spring barley. It was seeded in mid-September. It was into sweet corn, and this photo was taken in late October, a little over about approximately 5 weeks after the seeding, and you can see we have a nice cover crop stand here. This is 2 bushel of spring barley into soybeans. This was planted in mid-September. This photo was taken post-harvest in middle of November. Again, we have a nice cover crop stand. There's uniformity issues. It's not to do with the application. It has to do with the spreading of the residue and wheel traffic. This is a mixture of cereal rye and spring barley flown on in mid-September. The corn was harvested in late September, and this photo was taken in late October, and you can see we have a very nice cover crop stand here. And notice these are all taken, these are all from the 2013 growing year. And here's what I'd like to show you. This is a south central Wisconsin, so the locations where all these photos were taken. These are monthly precipitation departures from normal for this particular year, 2013. I'd like you to notice July, we were 1.8 inches below normal. August, we were 2.8 inches below normal rainfall. So we're coming into the seeding month well below normal rainfall amounts. September, we were an inch below normal. October, we were nearly an inch below normal. The fact of the matter is, we do not need a wet late summer or fall to establish these cover crops. We simply need about a ½ inch of rain to moisten the seed and allow it to germinate and get going. It does not need to be continual rains, and I think these pictures and this slide illustrate that we don't need normal or above average, above normal rainfalls. All right, so what's the take-home message? I'd like you to understand, if you have silage corn, there's a planned harvest date. You know when the crop's, approximately when the crop's going to have access to sunlight. It works very well in silage corn, which of course is a crop that could really, the soil could make a lot of use out of a cover crop because there is no residue left in the field. At this point, we can open this up for any other questions, and we appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Yeah, you were talking about how earthworms were dragging seed into their burrow, but the seed's germinating. So what is the purpose of them dragging it down to the burrow? Is it just typical behavior? Or?
You know, I actually don't know. I've never done any research, so I don't know the answer to that as to why they're bringing those seeds into the burrow. They're clearly not eating them, right? It's probably, as you said, just a behavior pattern to gather residue and bring it down there for nesting purposes or reasons I don't understand.
Mm-hmm. For guys who might be thinking about spring cover crops instead of doing it in the fall, what would be a good situation for them to consider doing that versus fall?
Yeah, so I'm not farming, but where I would use spring seeding if I were farming instead of fall seeding is if I was in a northern climate where I've got very little growing season post-harvest, and I'm dealing with intense slug pressure where I'm going to be faced with that seed being destroyed, or I'm faced with placing residue on the growing cover crop at a time where it doesn't have enough day length or heat units to grow back through the residue. And by the way, also, if I don't have time or the equipment or the manpower to drill it myself, if you had time to drill this cover crop post-harvest in the fall, I would still suggest that prior to a frost seeding. The other reason why I would consider doing it in the spring would be in the event that I've been having a difficult time getting the cover crop terminated in the spring. Maybe I'm in a really wet area and getting my sprayer through the field has been very, very challenging. By planting it in the spring and a winter annual in the spring, specifically, this would not work for a summer annual, but by planting a winter annual in the spring, if the plant does not vernalize, it's going to remain vegetative, and it's not going to get very, very tall, and it's not going to tie up a lot of nitrogen in that plant. That plant is still going to have a low carbon to nitrogen ratio, and so we've created a much bigger termination window.
Damon, I'd like to thank you today for sharing your insights on aerial cover crop seeding and how no-tillers can do a better job putting this tool to use on their own farms. I'd like to thank everyone out there in our virtual audience for joining us today. If you still have more questions of Damon about his presentation, please leave them in the comments section of this webpage, and we'll get an answer to you as soon as possible. And just a reminder, if you'd like to find out more about cover crop management, go to www.covercropstrategies.com, our new website that we launched, for more answers.